Welcome to Pixelrant, a video series dedicated to interactive design tools, tips, and tricks. In our very first episode, we're going to do an overview of interactive prototyping in Principle for Mac. Hello and welcome to Pixelrant. My name is Ben Krogh and I'm an interactive designer from Portland, Oregon. And just as a bit of background about myself, I've been designing interactive experiences for companies like Spotify, Nike, Microsoft, and Intel for the past 7 or 8 years. So today in Pixelrant, we're going to get acquainted with Principle, which is a prototyping application for Mac OS. So if you're not familiar with Principle, like I said, it's about prototyping. And we can see here on principleformac.com has a little blurb about what this is. It's a tool built for quickly building out those prototyping ideas you have to see how a particular user flow or interaction would feel, as opposed to just a static design you might be using Photoshop or Sketch or something like that to lay out. So if you don't have it yet, you can head here, principleformac.com. You can download it. It is $129 to buy, but it also comes with a free trial if you're just looking to check it out. So let's open up Principle and take a look. So today we're just going to go through the basics and just see how we can get our way around Principle and what comes with that. So when we open up Principle, here we can see that we're greeted with a untitled blank document, and we can see a couple different areas inside of the application. This area here where you have all of your project things and these tools is called the canvas. And inside the canvas, you're going to see things like the inspector in this area, the layer panel over here in the left sidebar, as well as a default artboard created for you. You're also going to see a little window floating over your canvas, and this is the preview area where you can preview the prototype as you make it, and you can resize this window and make it larger or smaller based off of what you want. In this case, we're going to leave it small because we don't need this quite yet, so we'll leave it off to the side. So as we can see, there's a default artboard created. Your prototype inside of Principle is going to be bound to these artboards. So if you're making an iPhone prototype or if you're making a desktop prototype, your artboard is going to need to follow those size requirements. And we can see here in the inspector that there are some size presets Principle has created if you want to use them. Anything from an Apple Watch to iPhone sizes, iPads, desktop, TV, and dribble shots. So you can pick one of those if you want, or in this case, we're just going to go ahead and leave our default artboard at 1000 by 600 pixels wide. And these are the things that we use, artboards, to lay out on and build our prototype. So once we have an artboard, we can start putting things on it, and Principle handles those things as layers, and those will appear here in the layers side panel. So in order of creating things inside of Principle, you can insert a rectangle or a text block. So we can insert a rectangle by either hitting R or choosing this rectangle button here on the side. So in this case, I'll go ahead and click rectangle, and we can see that Principle has just inserted one right in the artboard for us. And we can see in the layer panel corresponding here, we have our first layer named layer. So I'm just going to double click on this layer and name it box. And now we have our layer renamed as box. And we can click on this layer and drag it around the artboard anywhere we want. Once we select this layer that we've created, we can see there's some new information in the inspector, and here's where we can do things like use some alignment tools. We can change the position of this actual layer on the canvas, the artboard, by using the X and Y values if we want. If we drag these around, we can move that layer. We can also do things like make it wider or taller. In this case, let's try 200 pixels by, let's say, another 200 pixels. Let's just make a big square. We'll put this in the center of the canvas. And we can also see if we want to rotate this layer, we can use the angle area, and we can also change the scale of it by modifying it here in the scale field. There's also the opacity of the layer and the radius of the corners. If I wanted to make this a circle, I would just type in 200, which is the size of the width and height, and it would become a circle. So there aren't any ovals to insert inside of Principle, but you can modify your rectangle shapes to become a circle quite easily. In this case, we'll just go ahead and leave it at 0, just leave it a square. And then we can see things like changing the fill of our layer, as well as the color of the stroke and the width of the stroke. So if I want to change the fill, I can click on this square here and it will open up a color dialog, and I can just go ahead and drag things around. Let's just kind of make this a light gray, more of a cool gray. And we can also do things like putting in the RGB values. The A here is for the alpha, which is the opacity of that fill color. So if I wanted to make this 75%, I can type in 75. You can see this updating here. But in this case, we'll just leave it as 100%. And then we can even paste in a hex value here if we want to do it that way, as well as a color picker. Same thing is true with the stroke. If we want to modify that color, we can do all sorts of things here. Or if I want to match the fill color, I can use the color picker, hover over that, and I can just match that and increase the stroke width if I want, but we don't need one in this case. We'll just leave it at 0. So that is these ways you can modify your layers within the inspector. And if I want to add in one more element, let's say I want to add in text, I can click on the text button or type T on the keyboard and it will spit in a text block here for me. So we can see here we've got another layer that's inserted on my layers panel. I can see that it's automatically named text, and let's just drag it above our rectangle here, and in the alignment area I can just make it centered. I can modify the text size. Let's make this 18 point, and I can choose a different typeface. Right now it's going to default to a system font, so it has Helvetica Neue bold. Let's maybe change it to something like Proxima Nova semi-bold. There we have it. If we want to modify this text, we can just double click and type hello there. So now we've got two layers. We've got text and a box inside of our artboard. And as we've been adding these things, we can see the preview has been updating here as well, and we can see that these layers are visible in our preview window. If I want to take these layers and make them as a group, sometimes we want to take a bunch of objects that are in a screen or interaction or prototype and group them together to manipulate them as one. We can select both of those by selecting the text as well as the box by holding Shift, and we can hit Command G on our keyboard or the group button here in the toolbar, and it will create a group based off of those layers. So here in our layers side panel, we can see that text plus box has been created, and Principle handles these groups in a folder structure inside your layers side panel. You can name this group whatever you want. If you want to name it group 1, we could do that, or anything unique you might require. We can see here now when I select this group, I'm actually selecting both at once, and I can drag those around the artboard together. If I want to select only one item inside of a group, I can hold down Command and select each individual layer on its own, or I can select the layer from the layers sidebar. So if we want to take this group that we've created and ungroup it, and we don't want it to be a group anymore, we can just hold Shift Command G, and Principle will ungroup that for us, and they're back to their own individual elements. Some other layers and ways you can use Principle: you can import things like video and images right into your prototype. So in this case, if we want to bring in an image, I can drag in this image I have in the desktop it's an image of Jimmy Fallon holding a piece of hay saying hey. We can just drag this image right into it from the desktop. And if we want, we can also even bring in video directly into our prototype, and it will play inside the prototype. So if I open up my preview after I've dragged in a .move video file, I can see a video of myself saying hello, and we can use this inside of prototypes that might include something like a video application or a video player or something we're designing, which is just another great feature of Principle. So we're just going to delete these for now since we don't need it for today. Next, we're going to go through how we can actually mask elements inside of Principle as well. So we've learned how to group things, but another thing that Principle does in a more unique way than other layout programs is masking. So if I want to mask images, what I need to do is do a couple steps in order to achieve that. So in this case, I want to mask Jimmy Fallon's face. I'm going to create a rectangle by hitting R. And let's say I want to use this rectangle as the mask. I'm going to resize this over the image beneath it. And I'm going to go over to my Layers side panel and select Hay and drag it right onto that rectangle I placed above it. And now we can see that it's created this folder structure in the Layers side panel, but it's not quite masking it yet, and that's because we have not enabled the feature above the Layers side panel right here, which is Clip Sublayers. So if I select that, we can see with one click, it is masked to the layer above it, and now I can see that I've got this mask of Jimmy Fallon's lovely face. And if I want to not have that be the case, I can turn off that feature anytime in the sidebar. So that's how you group and mask inside of Principle. Next, we're going to go through just very basically how to start linking artboards together and create a very basic prototype. So in this case, we've got one artboard, and we can see that as we've been selecting these layers inside of the artboard, we see this lightning bolt icon next to the layer. And that is really where the magic happens here within Principle. Clicked on this will expand this menu of options that lets you make these elements inside your artboard interactive. And what these options are a whole list of interactions to take on this layer that will lead it to a different state. So in this case, we've got a long list, but we're going to focus on two interactions, a hover and a tap. So what I want to do is create a hover state. Let's say I want this little square to kind of grow a little bit when I hover over it. So what we're going to do is go to hover inside, and since I only have one artboard, what I want to do is make a duplicate of this artboard so that when I hover over this layer, it will take me to a different state. So I can click on hover inside, click and hold, and I drag, and you see that there's an arrow that gets created. And it says duplicate of artboard 1 because I'm holding it over this artboard. So if I click and hold and place it over artboard 1 and then let go, I can see that Principle will automatically make a second artboard. And now we have two artboards where we have the connection shown with this arrow that's placed above these artboards. So box hover inside will lead from one artboard to the second artboard. But if we look in our preview, there's really nothing happening because we haven't made any changes yet. In order to make something happen, we need to make this box do something different from the first artboard to make the hover state distinct. So in this case, what I might do here is let's maybe have this card just hover and just get a little larger when we hover over it. So if I take the corners and hold Alt-Shift, can resize it from the center, and let's say we make this 235 by 235 on hover. So let's see if that works. If we go back to our first artboard and expand our preview, we can see that on hover it gets larger, but now we're kind of stuck on this second artboard, and nothing's happening. So what I want to do now is say when I hover off of this square, it should go back to its normal size, just like a button would. So let's go back in and make that happen. What we can do here is we basically just have to remap the interaction back to the original state. So we'll click on this box, and we'll click on the lightning bolt icon again, and we'll say when I hover outside of this layer, I actually want it to go back to the way it was. So I'm just going to hold and mouse over the first artboard and let go, and we can see here that box hover outside has an arrow pointing back. So now we have this loop going back and forth when we hover inside and out. So let's take a look and see how that works. So if I hover over my box, I can see this slick hover state is being animated for us by Principle. And that's the cool thing about Principle, is it makes some of these decisions for you to animate these values that have changed between the two artboards. So if we want to actually see what Principle is doing and view what changes are going on, we can actually click on this interaction here, this transition, and it will bring up the animations panel, which we can also bring up by clicking this in the toolbar. So we can see here that the X and Y values are changing and the width and height values are changing, and Principle makes a default animation for you, and we can see that they are taking 0.3 seconds to animate. We'll go deeper into this animation panel in a later episode, but for now that's perfectly acceptable. And now what we might want to do is just do one more interaction here to wrap things up. So I've got this hover state working, but maybe when I click on this expanded state, I want it to fill the entire screen and change maybe to a different color. So what I can do here is click on the second artboard, and just because we've already made one interaction on the hover doesn't mean we can't do another one. So what we're going to do is click on the lightning bolt arrow, and on tap here at the top of the list, we're going to want to do that. So when I tap on this layer, it should do something else. So I'll click and hold and make a duplicate of this artboard, and we can see that now a new interaction is created. So I want to go ahead and select this, and let's say I want it to fill absolutely every bit of the screen. So I'm just going to make this whole box fill the entire artboard, and I'm going to change this color to maybe this teal. This might be a pretty crazy interaction, but let's see how this works. So if we go back and we open our preview here, you can go back to the very beginning by clicking this back arrow. We can see we're hovering over this box, it's working, but now we want it to expand on click. So I'm going to tap, and we can see that that background took the entire screen up and filled it. So there we have it. We've got this functioning prototype of a hover state and a tap state. We can see these 3 artboards have been created off of this interaction. So there you have it. There's a basic way to get started by building a very simple prototype in Principle. In our next episodes, we're going to look more at the animations panel and drivers and how to build out a more complex and realistic user interface inside of Principle. Thanks for watching Pixelrant. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you're on Twitter, you can follow along at _Pixelrant for more tips and tricks and news of when the next videos will launch.